culinary arts, and Ted once again has brought some tasty treats. He has lavender lemonade and chamomile tea, and I believe you said some pickles?
Some bread and butter pickles.
Bread and butter pickles as well for tasting after the program this evening, and he will be commenting on food preparation and so forth related to this evening's program. And then Joanne Curran-Celentano. Joanne Curran-Celentano, who will comment once again on the nutritional aspects of this evening's program as well. For the program, you'll recognize the familiar face of Joel Miller, our star from the last program a month ago, who will talk a bit on vegetables and fruits. And then we have with us Melissa Sim Hollister, who will be talking about honey and bees. And we'll try to allow a maximum amount of time for those folks. It's a little bit more of a crowded schedule this month than it was last month. So I think we need to move right along with Joel.
Okay. So I'm Joel Miller. My wife and I run the Wild Miller Gardens in the north end of town here. We grow a wide selection of vegetables, and we've been asked to speak again. I think it's a... You've
got wonderful things to say.
Okay.
And I really do, so I'm sure that other people would like to.
Okay, I'll try. So it's a broad subject, obviously, vegetables and fruit growing. So I'm going to brush on a few things, but then I guess most of it we'll leave to question and answers at the end. First off, I just want to say I'm really glad to see all the books in the back and the fact that they're available at the library, because I think besides hands-on learning in the garden, reading is one of the best ways to pick up tricks and ideas, and besides talking to friends and other growers. But last time we were here, we talked about roots and the growing and the storing of. This will touch on some other things, so I guess we can mention that vegetables can cover the whole spectrum of a plant. You could have the root as the edible portion, the stem, the leaf, the fruit, the flower in some cases. And I think it all starts with the seed, obviously, and an idea and some planning. And I think the planning can start the year ahead, or it can start as soon as you work up some ground to plant. And I think besides the seed, I think there's about 5 steps that come to mind. You have prepping the ground, you have planting the seed, weeding or cultivating, harvesting, and I guess eating or sharing. There's, whether you have garden space or not, there's a lot of people in town that do, and a lot of farms in town also that grow them, ours and others included, Melissa as well. And we sell through the local farmers market in Lee on Thursday nights in the summer. And we also run a farm store, a self-serve farm store, where this is all available.
Can you talk about seedlings at this point?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good place to start, actually, because the seed, it could start in the greenhouse, and you could grow it out as a seedling, or you could be direct seeding in the spring. The difference being, in the greenhouse, you'd start your seed several weeks before transplanting, and you'd grow it up to a point where it would survive transplanting into the garden. And the direct seeding, you just put the seed straight in the ground and sometimes hope for the best. I think both options are viable for different crops. Some crops work better than others with direct seeding or transplanting. And some crops you could do several plantings of in a season. I think some of the most satisfying crops that I find are the ones that you can plant once and they provide all season long. Something like a kale plant, where you plant it in the spring and you pick a leaf and it grows back and it keeps coming all year. I think that's a great place to start with gardening, because it's something that's very forgiving and satisfying. It being a leafy green, we can touch lightly on the fact that as far as nutrition, it's seeking more of a nitrogen source, which will help that grow better, as opposed to, when we talked about roots, like more phosphorus. and the nitrogen promotes the dark green, dark leafy green aspect. There's lots of ways you can fertilize your garden. You could rely on compost-based methods. There's chemical fertilizers available. There's organic fertilizers available. There's a whole broad spectrum of pretty much anything. It all depends on, I guess, your philosophy and your thoughts going into growing and what you want to manage and what kind of time you have to manage it. And these are all things that once you you get an idea of what you're looking for, you can find out more about them about those practices through a grower you might be purchasing through too. Farmers markets are great for that because you get a chance to stop and talk for a few minutes with a grower, get to meet them, and in the case of our farm store, we'd be happy to have people come and visit and get a little tour of what we're doing too. So I guess
What vegetables would you start from seed this time of year?
you mean what would you start from seed? She starts most of our seeds. Well, we just started some kale for early transplanting in the greenhouse, and we just started our onions and our leeks. Those are something that I think can benefit from. They certainly like as long a season as possible. With any sort of covered, protected growing space, you could be starting lettuces, any number of leafy greens. All of these would be started indoors and then moved out as they were ready.
What time of year do you start most of your transplants?
We start most of our transplants probably later in this month of March.
So you start tomato plants in March in the house?
You could, yes. Yeah. There's, depending on what your conditions are you're planting into, you want to make sure they have enough light. That's one big thing.
I have a lot of sun in my house, but I don't have, that's all I have. I could put it in front of a window.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can touch more on that too in the question and answer afterwards, but I think for now we should probably move it along.
Okay, thank you very much, Joel. And now we'll hear from Melissa Sim Hollister on the subject of raising bees and honey. Melissa?
Okay. Hi. I am the co-owner with my husband Jeff and daughter Stephanie Hollister of the Hollister Family Farm. We have been producing vegetables and hay for the past 25 years, and we have been beekeeping for the past 5 years. And what I'm going to do is I'll give a little introduction of my stuff, and then we'll do some facts. Okay. Beekeeping is a form of art. One of the things you should decide is the reason you're beekeeping. Today I brought 2 types of honey. This is a Lee honey, and this is a Dover honey. I'm going to leave them like that. You can kind of see the color difference. There's a little bit of difference between the 2. This is some creamed honey that we've just introduced. And you could be doing it because you want to make beeswax, candles, or something like that. It's taken me 5 years to produce enough wax to start making anything. So I've started with making molds. And our wax is 100% honey. We don't feed our bees to make them make wax. Maybe you want to be a comb builder, where you want to have comb honey. This is called a Ross Round. I tried it, and I'm still working on it. So this was my first year doing comb honey, using the Ross Rounds. You may want to do it just using regular comb. This was from a swarm, so this is one that I had captured, and so this is what natural comb honey comb looks like. Maybe you want to be a queen breeder. In this little capsule there is a queen, and you can look at her later. Or maybe you want to be a beekeeper because you want to do pollination. the apple orchards or vegetable farms. Everybody wants bees. Or maybe you want to maintain the bee population. Where will you get your education? I recommend a bee school or a bee mentor or an online school. And the Seacoast beekeepers meet here at the Grange on the 3rd Thursday of the month. Okay, here comes the facts. So I'll give a bunch of different facts, and afterward, if you have a really important question about that, I can go in depth with it. As a beekeeper, we have lots of decisions. Hive location is very important. Southern exposure with an afternoon shade is ideal. The hive must be in a high and dry area. The nectar needs to have the moisture removed out of it. Otherwise, your hive could be moldy. The honey should be, I like honey between 17.9%, 18%. If it's over that, the honey will ferment, and then it's no good to anybody, and the bees will get sick. So they want to store capped honey. Will the hive be at your house or another place? And the reason you would want it at another place. I did this little thing because I thought it would be fun for everybody to know. How many hives are how many hives are in your 2-mile radius? So if the hive's going at your house, you can use the GPS system, and you can determine, if you go like to the bee meetings and you listen, you talk to people, and you kind of get an idea of how many hives are in our area. So this is a GPS model. I have 4 locations in the town with the circles of the 2-mile radius, and you can come up and look at it. And I tried to do a calculation of what I thought the town of Lee had for beehives. Now, I don't know if how many of these hives are alive. I heard a little bit about some dead hives. I figured the town has somewhere around 130 hives right now. And they are scattered all about town. So if I have this 2-mile radius going on, and everybody else has these 2-mile radiuses going on, there's lots of bees doing lots of pollinating. And I think Copple House knows that there's quite a few bees in their patches. Okay. How will you choose the type of hive? Talk to beekeepers. Every beekeeper has their own opinions. The types of hives may include a Langstroth or a top bar hive. The Langstroth hive is the most common hive for raising honey. A top bar hive is less expensive. It's a long 4-foot hive. They're not as successful for living. You have to decide whether you want to go with an 8-frame hive or a 10-frame hive. You have to decide if you want to use medium frames or deep frames. And then you have to decide whether you want wired wax, natural comb, or plastic foundations. And this is a nuke box. I use the nuke box for breeding. I use it for capturing swarms. I use it for splitting. And I use this for overwintering. So I use this box for lots of different things. In here I have a few different things. This right here is a wired foundation. Wires here, they go this way, they go this way. This is all done by hand. This right here is a plastic foundation. I use a black foundation because when I'm analyzing and looking for eggs, I can usually see them against the black. It's a white egg, so it's easy to identify. And then this would be your natural comb. So if you had a top bar hive, this is the type of comb pattern they would make in a top bar hive. And we're going to be trying a top bar hive this summer. Woodware companies. Woodware companies is not always compatible. A bee needs 3/8 space, so if you mix a couple different bee companies together, their space is not always necessarily the same. All their depths are different. If the bees don't have the correct bee space, they build either wax or they build propolis, or sometimes they just can't move. So these are the 3 of maybe 5 companies I use. A full setup from Better Bee could cost you $300. That's not including shipping, and wood's expensive to ship. And you don't always get what you need. This one right here, it was a Pierco foundation with a plastic on the outside. I prefer to use a wood on the outside with a plastic foundation because I think the wood absorbs some moisture, and the bees do need some moisture, and they need some place for it to go. How are you going to get your bees? The pros and cons. Do you want package bees, which are 3 pounds, which is a queen that you usually need to introduce into it? Or do you want a nuke hive, like this one? Comes with 5 frames, sometimes they come with 4 frames, depends on the deal. And the queen's already in there, the queen's already laying. And those run about $135. And you usually order your packages or nuke box in January. The sooner you order your bees, the sooner you'll get on the first shipment. And then, so when they start coming in from Georgia, that's how it works. I haven't been buying any bees for the past 3 years. Let's see. What are you looking for in your bees? Temperament, honey, VSH, or northern bees? Italians, Carniolans, or Russians, those are the varieties of bees. The type of management of a hive is all record keeping. Dates of all activities, actions to be taken at the moment you're in the hives, questions, and making notes to ask someone else. More experienced beekeeper, you're stuck. Actions needed once you've gone in the hive. Do I need to rotate something? Do I need to add a super? Do I need to add pollen? Always thinking ahead what you need to get done. What will be your mite control? Mites are one of the biggest killers of our bees. Drone comb, this is a drone comb. It's all male bees. Green comb. They draw it out. It's the first place the mites like to go to. Drones are 24-day, so they have a little bit longer time to reproduce in there. Somehow they know that. How are you going to draw your comb? Open frames for laying. These are all thoughts. Patterns of laying. Signs of brood disease. Is the queen laying well? Is there open cells? What's actually going on in that hive? What do you do when you see a supersedure cell or a swarm cell? Are your bees leaving? Is the queen leaving? Has she been marked? Entrance activity, is it high, low? Are they going to swarm? Do you need to add more honey supers? How will you get the honey out of the cells? And bottling equipment. What will you do with the honey? Market it, you'll need insurance. Wintering hives. Make sure you have enough food, 70 to 100 pounds of honey or syrup. You need to make sure your mites are under control. You have to decide whether you're going to wrap your hive. Some people do, some people don't. On the bottom of this hive, I can show you, has a bottom screen. Do you close the bottom? Do you want to allow ventilation, or do you want it closed where they're not getting drafts? And how will you deal with the winter moisture? Moisture is a big killer. This year, from January 25th to, 18 days out, we had 14 days in those hives that it was freezing. So there was a lot of ice buildup in them. And so I think, I've been doing temperature readings and moisture readings for the past 5 years. All of these decisions are what make us individual beekeepers. And what works for one beekeeper may not work for another. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Now we have Joanne Curran-Celentano, Professor of Nutritional Science at UNH, to give us some input on the nutritional aspects of some of the products we're speaking of today.
So in 10 minutes, I'm going to give you a quick overview of a few things that I think are important about, from a nutrition perspective, on fruits and vegetables, and even a few things on honey. We can see here, this is you can't read it obviously, but this is a rainbow on my plate portfolio that actually talks about why the different fruits and vegetables are so important, and I'll just mention this. So in plants, we know they have nutrients, so we know there are vitamins and minerals, but there are also other things that are in plants that are called phytonutrients, and phyto just refers to plant. And so that when we see the different colors that come through on our plants, what we know is that the different colors actually represent some of these nutrients that confer the health benefits of plants. So when we talk about, Joel mentioned kale, we've grown quite a bit of that at the greenhouses out in the fields out at Woodman Farm for some research that I'll talk about. But we know that what we say from a nutrition perspective is we know that we eat fruits and vegetables because they taste so wonderful, but they're also providing some benefits aside from just the standard nutrients. We don't understand everything about them from a science perspective, but we know that the more colors you can consume, the more likely you are to actually be consuming all of the wonderful things that plants can provide. So from the purples and the blues and the fruits, through the reds and the oranges and the yellows, and then the greens, we know that they each have their own particular flavor, so to speak, not only of taste, but also in terms of the nutrients they provide. So we say right from kindergarten on, put a rainbow on your plate, and that's how you're going to get the most benefit from a nutrition perspective. It's a very simple message, but if you think of it from that perspective, you're really going to maximize what you can actually get from fruits and vegetables. I was thinking as I was looking at the schedules that we have over the next few weeks that at the university I have had the good fortune of spending time in many different areas of agriculture that I really didn't really think about myself as so involved in. But one that I'd like to talk about briefly here is some work that we did with green leafy vegetables. We've also done work with milk, and we've done work with eggs, and so I'm going to be able to talk about some of the things we've done before in the next few too. With the term phytonutrient, I just want to bring it to one of the particular groups that we've done some work with, and those are the carotenoids, which are the colors of the green, the many colors of fall, many of the colors that are associated with fruits and vegetables. And the reason that I'm bringing this forward for one specific example is some of the work that that we continue to do at the University of New Hampshire with some of our colleagues is looking at how kale is good for your eyes, and we always think of carrots as being good for your eyes, but in fact there's another pigment in green leafy vegetables that actually is really important for vision. And so when we have 600 different chemical phytonutrients that exist in nature, only about 20 are actually detectable in the serum, and 2 are found in the eye. And why do we care about that? Because there's a condition that we've been studying called macular degeneration that occurs as we get older or age, just from an accumulation of life. That there's some changes in the retina of the eye and also the cornea of the eye that just occurs. If you live long enough, if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you will have cataracts. For many individuals, they also get a problem with their retina. And we've been looking at whether is it something that our plants can actually help us protect against. So this is what you would look at if you have healthy retinas. You look at them and you see these nice the faces of these 2 little boys. If you have macular degeneration, that's what you would see. So that because of the changes in the eye, you don't actually get to you lose the central vision. You're not blind, but you lose central vision, so that you lose the ability to see right in the center of your eye. And what we know is that in this area, this is a cross-section of an eyeball. In this area here, there is a pigment, and that pigment, as you can, this is pulling it out. This is a cross-section of a real retina. This happens to be a monkey's retina, but we know that humans have the same profile. There's this yellow. Can you all see the yellow here? That yellow is actually the pigment that's found in kale and spinach and other green leafy vegetables. It's called lutein, and it's we can't synthesize it, so the only place we can get it is from our diet. And so what we've been doing at the University of New Hampshire is looking at how we can enhance the lutein in our diet through our diet. So we know that there are certain fruits and vegetables that are really high in it. Kale, as Joel was just mentioning, kale is. We actually just wrote. I was a co-author on a cookbook on kale. Spinach, red bell pepper. So these are the places that you see it in high concentration. Kale's the superstar here, spinach, and other places that you see it. It's not in carrots. So even though you think of carrots as being good for your eye, this is not what they do. Carrots is not high in kale. So we did an intervention a few years back where we actually grew, we used spinach for this study. We've also done with kale. This is at Woodman Farm, and we grew a couple of different varietals of spinach, and we looked at ones that had a particular profile that we were interested in. We came into the kitchen at Barton Hall, and we created that spinach into meals, and then we actually, and here's stuffed shells. And then we had subjects that actually ate this 5 days a week for 4 months, and it was a serving, a half cup of spinach, and people loved this study. It was, they would come, we'd deliver, either they'd come to us or we'd deliver 5 meals, and it was pizza topping or soup or the stuffed shells, a couple other things. We had a bunch of different, this was a chef that worked with us and created these meals. And they're very simple to consume. A half cup of this happened to be spinach. And then we measured their blood levels of pigment. This is one of my graduate students who's now an ophthalmologist. He actually did this study and became an ophthalmologist because he was so interested in what happens in the eye and nutrition. And we can actually measure, without taking the retina out, we can actually measure the density of the pigment. So we're looking to see if we can change that through dietary factors, if we can, by just simple manipulation of the diet, by adding some fruits and vegetables, if we can increase that pigment in the eye. And we found that a half cup of spinach consumed 5 times a week significantly increased the pigment that was measured in the eye. So we weren't looking at whether it improved vision per se. We didn't look at whether it prevented disease. We just know that the pigment is changeable, and with that, if you can change and increase the density of the pigment, then additional studies are looking at whether that actually prevents the disease or can slow down. We actually don't plan to cure or to necessarily prevent forever, but if you can slow down the rate of change in the retina over time, we know that, and if we can do it by something as simple as increasing our consumption of fruits and vegetables, if you just change it by a few years, you're going to have a big change in the quality of life for the aging population. Of course, I'm really interested as I'm aging too. This is becoming much more relevant, and I hear so much. Macular degeneration is something that people don't die from it, but it affects the quality of life and affects their ability to do things that make life valuable. So we feel really confident that this work is actually going to be helpful in terms of showing the importance. We're always looking at fruits and vegetables we know are important, and we're looking at the data that actually gets out there and says, please increase your green leafy vegetables. There are some other issues with this that we can talk about, or you can ask me about. And if anybody wants more information on this, feel free to ask me about it later. We did a similar study with eggs, and I'll talk about that when we talk about eggs, but Charlie's eggs were part of our research project. We were looking for eggs that had a really high lutein content. Chickens will eat green leafy vegetables, and their egg yolks turn orange, yellowy, really dark. And what that is that's the lutein that we're looking for. And when it's in an egg yolk, it's really available. So even though the total amount isn't as great as what's in kale, we absorb it so well because the yolk is in such a good matrix that we can absorb it. So we found with Charlie's eggs, we found a really interesting increase in macular pigment with a relatively small amount of pigment. And we did that against grocery store eggs. So it was the organic eggs from Charlie's farm versus grocery store eggs, and it's really different in terms of what we were able to show. So again, it's the actual source is green leafy vegetables. It came through the egg, and out we go. So we did the egg study. The last thing that I'll mention then is honey, and boy, I had learned a lot about honey today. So I think I don't actually understand most of the language there, but it's really fascinating. So I looked into honey. It's really so interesting to try to find nutritional values on some of these items. So I looked at why is honey so wonderful? I mean, we know it's delicious. It's sweet and it's delicious, and it carries the flavor terroir. We know that it tastes different depending on where you are. So if you buy local honey, it tastes like its place, and that's really wonderful. honey carries an antibacterial properties, and actually there's some use of honey in places where antibiotics aren't available. They actually use honey for wound healing because of the properties that come with it, because of this natural product. The one thing about honey that's different than sugar is that it's not empty calories. That with honey, even though it doesn't, it's not high levels of nutrients. It has nutrients, has many different vitamins and minerals in it in very small quantities, and we don't use very much of it, but it's not the same as sugar, which is empty calories. There are actually some nutrients that are in honey. The other thing about honey that I found out that I thought was really interesting is that it may actually have an influence on glucose tolerance, so in our ability to regulate our blood sugars. And so one of the issues that we have with our high fructose corn syrup and highly refined diets is that we're seeing a rise in diabetes and our ability to actually balance our insulin and problems that come with that. One of some of the findings that they're showing is that honey as a sweetener may actually enhance glucose tolerance. And I don't have the results of this study, but there is a big study going on right now in the U.S. government, USDA, and the Agriculture Research Center that's in North Dakota. It has an ongoing study right now looking at glucose tolerance and using honey as a sweetener versus corn syrup as a sweetener versus cane sugar as a sweetener. And the reason that they're doing this is because there is data that suggests that if you use, for a person who has any problems with regulating sugar, that the honey actually will help with glucose tolerance in a way that sugars and certainly high fructose corn syrup don't. So we won't know the results of that until 2014, but I thought it was really interesting to see that we actually have some other reasons to think that honey in our diet is not just sweet, and it's been around for a very long time as a sweetener. We kind of grew up, we evolved with honey, that maybe we need to go back and revisit this as the sweetener of choice in the future, and we'll see some more on that as the data comes forward. So with that, I'll wait for questions. My turn for questions, okay? Brian.
Swiss chard, where does that fall on the scale between spinach and kale?
It would be more like spinach. Yeah, which is really high. It's not quite as high as kale, but it's right in the same range. And the interesting thing about this, it really depends on where it's grown and what variety. I mean, Joel, you probably know more about the changes, not necessarily in the carotenoid content, but we found that depending on the varieties, we went down to germplasm to find different varieties that have different levels, so that when you look at a one that you pick from the grocery store versus one you pick from the field, even if it was the same variety, it's going to be really different. So many factors can influence it. But most of the data that we use comes from the USDA database, and so that they do a compilation of 14 different locations, and so we have a number that we put on kale, and we have a number that we put on spinach, and we have a number we put on Swiss chard, even though your garden would be different than my garden. Swiss chard would fall in the middle.
You have a question?
I had a question on the same topic on your spinach and kale. In your 5-week study, did you have other levels other than spinach 5 days a week? I love spinach, but I think 5 days a week I'd get sick of it.
Actually, because we put it in a variety of different food sources, nobody got sick of it. They actually were very happy to be consuming it. Yeah. But you don't have to.
The macular situation with, say, 2 or 3 servings a week rather than 5 every day of a week.
So what we did is we wanted to control it because it was a research project, but what we can say is that the consumption of these can increase. And I should say that there are many factors that influence this in terms of how you absorb fats, and if you smoke. There are many different factors that can influence how people respond to this, but in general, I would say that adding the green leafy vegetables to your diet will can increase your macular pigment. So it's just a matter of how much. The other thing is people will take pills, and the pills will also do it. But we found that the dietary sources are equally as effective.
Will you share your recipes?
I'll bring the book the next time. Okay.
One more question in the rear, and then we'll move on, but we'll open it to questions
I'm
afterwards.
assuming 5 servings means cooked spinach. There's a huge difference between raw and cooked.
For this kind of a study, it would have to be cooked because cooked would be much more bioavailable than raw in this case. So yeah, and half cup of raw spinach would not be much.
Okay, so now we'll get into the question of the preparation of many of these different foods, and we'll hear from Chef Ted McCormack from Blue Moon Evolution Restaurant in Exeter, another familiar face and a regular on the team. Ted?
All right, thanks. So I want to start with handling and storage. As Joel had mentioned, they're not species, they're varieties, I suppose. But every fruit and vegetable is different, and then varieties within each category. There is a word for that, right? There's different varieties of apples, and then there's, so all apples are going to storage.
Heirloom?
Well, yeah, certainly. The apples are going to want different temperatures and humidity levels from the oranges and the limes and so on that we have. Luckily for us in the restaurant, we're buying weekly and often with produce 3, 4, 5 times a week, 5, 6 deliveries of produce weekly. So we're not having to store, as in last month Joel talked about the temperature and humidity that you want to store the crops at. We try to do our best with that, but we are going through lots of volume, and the time will not decay quick as fast as we're going to use it. So, but at home, it certainly matters, and they have the little crisper drawers, which I've never figured out. You slide the humidity thing over it. I don't think it makes much, but so as we keep, onions are outside the refrigerator, bananas are outside the refrigerator, and so on. But you may have to experiment and find the best place for your favorite vegetable. It does seem like sometimes the drawer ices up in your home refrigerator, but it's better than getting them limp outside. Lots of stuff gets stored in the refrigerator at work. Sometimes it's the safest place. At home, we have mice that steal bread off the counter. So,
Not tomatoes, though. You don't store tomatoes.
No tomatoes in the refrigerator. No, that's a really bad no-no. And the grocery store tomatoes are horrible. They shouldn't even be out there. But the topic's so wide with fruits and vegetables. Yeah, tomatoes are probably one of the pinnacle moments of getting those garden fresh tomatoes. And how to handle them, and they don't handle very well. You have to be gentle with them, like grapes. And some other time, I'll tell you about a story about hiking with grapes in my backpack. Oh. So don't do that either. You can't do that. So we store them and handle them. Everything gets washed properly, hopefully dried after it was washed. Sometimes you don't even wash them. We watched a program on mushrooms. I think last week on. May have been a PBS station or not, but some mushroom guy, and they asked him point blank, "Do you wash the mushrooms?" And he says, "No, I don't wash the mushrooms unless it's really, really dirty. If they were foraged mushrooms, they might be really heavy in dirt. But the mushrooms that you buy at the grocery store, or if they're cultivated in a sterile environment, sterile soil, soil substrate. So you just brush those off, and they sell little brushes, which are handy for these types of things. Potatoes, we give them a little brush off. At work, we use a little green scrub pad to scrub either the potatoes or the turnips, or maybe the carrots if they just need a little bit of work. Some of them need to be peeled, some of them don't need to be peeled. Every vegetable has its own unique preparation that's going to go into it. That's the study. That's why I paid that much money to go to school. So, and that's how I have to train the cooks. Is like, okay, we're going to use these Chantenay carrots for presentation on the dinner plate. These are bigger carrots. They're going to be used in the soup and the stew and the stock. So, these ones cost, $4 a pound at the farmer's market. These ones cost, $1 a pound from the wholesaler. So you have to know where to pick and choose your battles on that front. So when you end up with such good produce in the summertime, and sometimes even now, you can have the opportunity of preservation as well as preparation. So I brought some samples. These are from my home. My wife and I do a bunch of canning in the summer. Well, she does a lot of it, really. But we're going to sample the pickles. I think these are bread and butter pickles. But we made a tomatillo salsa, spiced peaches, as a tomato sauce, okra pickles, peach butter, corn relish, and apple butter, I believe, on the end. And now, quickly moving through the topics, we have lavender lemonade that we have at the restaurant. We're including flowers in this time? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I do my little best to keep the flowers. So I brought some dried chamomile. So you can take a look at that if you haven't seen that. This does grow in our environment. They sell it at the nurseries, and they're nice flowers, dull yellow maybe, with white. And and then this is a blend with spearmint, and so we will have some chamomile and spearmint tea. So I also brought, maybe Joel could grab a little bag. There's dried chilies. We grow, I love chili peppers, so we eat as many as we can. We make some hot pepper jelly, hot pepper relish, and then we dry a bunch for the winter. And I just made, that was dumb, I should have brought that. How about pumpkin mole enchiladas? That's what we made yesterday for lunch. So you can be creative with our vegetables that are just from here. So now if I can give you a quick little run through of building a plate, using these vegetables that we want to use as the color and crunch, all textures we want to look at, and that's how we build a plate. So it's the foundation. So we have this meat and potatoes attitude going on in our culinary world, but we need the vegetables for many reasons, for our health, but it also adds that rainbow. So I take the meat and then I add the vegetables accordingly to create a dish. So if we wanted an Indian curry, then we're using the pickled okra. We can use the peas. We wanted that green color because maybe this yellowy beige typical curry is unicolor. And then so you have the white rice, which doesn't really give it much more either. So we need to add something to that. So the chicken is the chicken, but we add all the other vegetable components. If there's grilled vegetables, and then we make a barbecue sauce, and now it's a summer chicken. And then if we stew it with some canned tomatoes and herbs, now it's a winter chicken. But so the chicken is versatile throughout the year as a protein component, and then we add whatever flavorings are going to go through it. And I'm really enjoying this, learning about what the nutrients bring to our health and our body and where we can get them, and getting them fresh and local is even better than what the grocery store eggs is Sarah Zoe said the gateway to local food, and that's absolutely true. So honey is also another big one that we use at the restaurant. We have raw food, which honey, if it's raw from the comb, it qualifies as raw. But the vegans don't like honey. It's not that they don't like. They don't eat honey because it's an animal product. So we use honey for some things. We use agave from other things, which is not from our climate, but it does fit this sweetener that's raw. So, and the honey goes excellent with a chamomile tea. So you'll find these little connections in the culinary world of A plus B equals better than C. What do they say? The components are.
The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
The whole is greater than the sum of the components. So, and that's what we have tried to follow through the cooking process. I guess we can take questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ted. And before we go to questions, I just have one announcement, and that is that Tina Sawtelle is present and would be happy to answer any questions concerning the subject of edible flowers. So, Tina, where are you?
Back here.
Okay, right back there. So if anyone wants to raise any questions about edible flowers to the group, Tina could certainly respond as well. Tina, did you want to make a few remarks?
No, I'll just entertain questions if anyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, this is the time for questions.
Tina, what flowers can we eat?
Well, there's a lot of different options of flowers that you can start now from seed to eat. A couple of the most popular are calendula, pot marigold, very nice to use in salad, and nasturtium is another nice spring thing to start. A lot of the different herbs can be used. And there's a whole list there are some of the books up back, and there's other lists that I brought as well, quite lengthy.
Do flowers have, this is a really ignorant question, do flowers have flavors?
They do. Some of them are very subtle, and some have a lot more flavor than others, a lot of herbs and
Chive flowers, so the chives grow and then they bloom and you think maybe they're past. But those blossoms are intense onion flavor. Yeah. So next,
Throw them all up. After they
sprinkle on your soup, you can pinch the head apart so that the little tiny flowerets.
Sometimes it's said that the borage flower tastes like cucumber. I don't know if that's another.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of very, very nice flavors.
And since you just mentioned particularly good flowers to eat, could you mention a few flowers that you wouldn't want to eat because they're poisonous? Is there such a thing?
I also have a list of poisonous flowers as well. It's a shorter list, but it is a list that you need to be aware of. Daylilies can be eaten in a lot of the different forms, tight as well as opened, but there's a lot of lily that absolutely cannot be eaten. Poinsettia is another one that they say is not under the poisonous list, but do not eat it. It says it will cause severe irritation in the mouth and others. But I also have a list up back too, and I'll put it with the books of a few. That's a shorter list, but of some popular plants, because it is good to know, the difference.
Right.
Yeah, right up front.
I have a comment and a question. I've grown chamomile before, and that's it'll seed itself. So if you give itself a spot in your garden, you can harvest from it, and it'll probably miss some, and they'll seed themselves. So you can have a chamomile patch. And my question was about squash blossoms to Ted. What's your favorite way to?
It's a real treat to get the squash blossoms. So I guess I had to figure out the math as I was asking the question. Can I have some squash blossoms? And they're like, well, that's poundage out of the field. So each squash blossom represents a squash that would have matured, and so that would have been $2 a pound for one squash. So, but one squash is not a pound. Hopefully, we want like about ½ pounds. So it might be $1 or more even for a squash blossom. And there are male and female blossoms. And that, in turn, that's why we have the bees. We need the bees to help us with that. They're really good.
Is there any rule of thumb for the flowers, like there would be for fruit, say that, it has 6 petals, you can eat it, or not, like an apple or any fruits that typically have a star pattern to the seed, you can typically eat. Is that true to any flowers that you could use as a rule of thumb?
Is it quantity? I didn't.
Well, if there was a pattern between the flowers of edible versus non-edible, but I don't.
Oh, I see. No, I don't think necessarily as far as color or that type of thing. We can look at the chart too and see if there's any resemblances and different, but not that I know of.
Question?
Okay, I have a question about preserving fruits. I like raspberries in the summer, and I know you can buy them at various farms, but what happens with raspberries, they seem to mold or go badly very quickly. And I heard that if you make a solution of vinegar, 1 part vinegar and 10 parts water, and dip them in it, and very quickly just dip the fruit in there, that they will not mold as readily. They will keep longer. Does anybody know about that? I'd like to try it this summer, so I was wondering if any of you have heard about that. A quick dip in the vinegar water solution, and then they can be refrigerated, and they will last a lot longer. But I don't know if it works.
I know that there's last week there was we presented a TEDx seminar series from New York. And one of the presenters there was talking about an item that she created a few years ago that now it's called fruit paper, and it's got some type of an acid on it. But it's just if you put it in underneath the fruit, the berries in particular, berries, strawberries, raspberries, it will prevent them from molding. And she actually uses this in farmers markets. She sold it in farmers markets, and she's from New York, but apparently it's gone national. And I haven't seen this, but do you remember hearing
I saw the TEDx thing that you did, and this woman did create this. It's a paper treated with something, I'm not sure what it is. If you Google fruit paper to prevent spoilage, you'll probably see it. I find with my raspberries, and I pick raspberries for a friend all summer, so I get a lot of raspberries, that typically, even in the summer, I'll just stick them right in the freezer, and then just use them, for whenever I want them. And they freeze very well. I just find if I keep them in their same...
They do have a tendency to not last as long as some other fruits.
Well, there's no doubt. They're very delicate little fruits, yes. So, but freezing them, because in the refrigerator, I find because of the damp, I guess, and of course you can't keep them out of the refrigerator, 2 or 3 days, they do start to break down. Yeah. There's no doubt.
Thank you.
Yes.
I've got the next session I'll bring up, I've got a little fact sheet about using vinegar to preserve, raspberries and also strawberries. And I thought it was kind of funny when I read it. I guess I sent it to some people last fall. But when I read it, there was a segment on NECN about preserving particularly raspberries, and I actually sent it to them. The lady that was doing the study said, well, these will last up to 10 days in the refrigerator. And I'm thinking to myself, whoever had raspberries that had to stay in the refrigerator for 10 days, I'm lucky if I even get any by the time they get home. But I'll bring that next time.
Thank you.
I did have a question for Ted, too. Do you use saffron at all?
Oh, that came up today. I was asking the cooks, I said, do we have anything else that's a flour? And Holland said, well, we have the saffron. And I said, yeah, that's not really from our area. It's Spanish. It doesn't fit the topic, so I didn't bring it. But we do have a 1-ounce tin of saffron, cost $95. And we used it on Valentine's to make a sauce for halibut. So a tiny, tiny bit. They're the pistons of a flour, and intense yellow, and has very aromatic. And it's used also in the Portuguese stew, so a tiny bit.
Yes.
I have a question for the farmer. I don't know your name. I'm sorry. Joel. When starting seedlings inside when you don't have a greenhouse, what do you suggest for lighting, and what do you suggest for soil? Because I always get these tall, spindly things that are just horrible, and then I have to go buy plants after all that time.
Mostly. What's the best situation for starting seedlings inside your house if you don't have a greenhouse to avoid becoming spindly? And usually that's a factor of light mostly. Even a south-facing window might not get enough light this time of year.
So can you buy, like, people put lights, we were thinking of buying lights, and like grow lights.
Yes, you can use ultraviolet lights that to alleviate that to some extent. You have to get very even coverage with the light to keep a sturdy plant.
I'm more concerned about the soil though, because the soil even when you grow them, then if your soil isn't aerated enough, it kind of compacts and gets hard. And what do you use for soil for your seedlings?
We use a compost-based soil. It's a potting soil. It's got vermiculite and perlite in it, different minerals that help for water absorption, and there are nutrients in it as well to hold it over, especially if we're starting stuff that's going to be in any given pot for more than 4 weeks. Typically, you try to, if you're starting really early and you are going to be using a grow light, you may need to repot at least once before it goes in the ground. 4 weeks is sort of they say the maximum on any small seedling tray that you'd want to keep a plant in a given piece of soil. And under grow lights, they do dry out very quickly too. So keeping them moist and using a potting mix that has some sort of moisture holding capacity to it is really important. And I think that keeps the soil lighter too. So yeah, whether you start in very small space with many seeds and then pot up to a bigger size, or start in normal size plugs and then go to a bigger size like a pot, yet however you manage it, that's the general idea. Does that kind of answer your question?
Okay. I see some hands back in the back.
This question is for Melissa. Melissa, I was gifted a jar of honey that had comb in it.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, how do I consume that? Is it there for effect, or do you really chew on it, or?
It's for effect, mostly. I mean, they say that it's good for your teeth. It's like a cleaner, so the wax you can chew on. It's really, that's what people do with it, is they chew it. So I guess that's about it. I'd be curious whether it was made with, whether they stimulated the bees to make the comb, or whether it was made from honey, but.
What difference does that make?
Oh, I'm just curious about that technique, I guess. I try to understand like the details of how things happen. And you can stimulate bees to make comb by feeding them sugar water. Most packaged bees, people have to feed them 1-to-1 sugar in the spring to make them make comb, so that she can lay eggs inside the hive and make a hive. So I'm just kind of curious now how people make comb. My comb's made from honey. The bees have to bring the nectar in, and they make their comb in their hives. So that's how I work it at home.
Would you say something about the percentage? You mentioned something about percentage of honey, and I didn't understand.
Oh, it's when bees cap their honey. I can show you a frame. When bees cap the honey, they cap it at 18%. I didn't show this. This is a medium frame. All my honey supers are all mediums, and all my brood frames are deeps. And so when the bees fill this, they cap it, and then I use a heated knife, and cut it off. And it goes into a extractor and then is spun. And that's how it comes out. So there's just like 3 cells of pollen in here. But so they cap this at 18%. And then I have a hydrometer, so I drop it in. 18% is honey. It's dry. It's thick. So they're taking out all that water. That's why when I said people really need to think about the location of their hives, if they put it in a very wet location, that water is never coming out of the hives. And that's why some hives can fail, is because honey actually ferments. So they get sick. But it's all part of learning, and you don't really know everything, and you just keep I keep just researching everything. Did I answer it? Yeah.
Hi. Coming over here tonight on NPR, they had a little piece on about, there's another new study, this one in Spain, about how healthy the Mediterranean diet is, you know, which has a lot of fruits and vegetables and olive oil too. And so I guess particularly helpful is to use olive oil on your vegetables, which I do all the time with lemon. That's the way I really like on any vegetable. And I don't know if nutritionally there is, I know with certain foods, when you combine certain foods, it actually makes those foods more healthy. So I don't know if lemon and olive oil actually does something to the vegetables or just tastes good. But again, another study that particularly that Mediterranean diet, the risk of heart attack is very low in this Spanish diet with all those wonderful tapas menus. So another.
So the oil on the vegetable actually helps with the absorption of the things that I was talking about here. So anything that's fat soluble, any of the nutrients in the plant that are fat soluble are absorbed better if there's some oil in there.
That we will absorb it better?
We will absorb it better, yeah.
Okay,
In fact, that study that came out, you know, if you are in any field long enough, you feel like you just go in these big, you know, waves up and down, up and down. So the low-fat craze that was sort of my mid-career has been completely debunked, and we're back into what my husband is Italian, Celentano, and I told you. So olive oil, olives, you know, it's like that's a healthy fat, and it's nuts. That was the other thing that they looked at, the use of nuts, and so we're, you know, that's the healthy diet at this point, and they had it was a well-designed study, and I think that the information was compelling, and until we have another study that says that it's not that way, I think that's what we're going with. But the olive oil is actually helpful in terms of the absorption of the nutrients that I was talking about, which are the fat-soluble nutrients. So.
Well, I see we're a bit past the hour, so I think it's time to adjourn. All of the panelists will remain for one-on-one questioning and conversation. Donna Lee, did you have anything that you wanted to add to this evening?
No, I was just so pleased that everybody's here, so interested.
Good, good. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.